Good afternoon. Are we rolling?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's going to be on. That's going to be on the video too of me asking. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this next session of One World, Many Beliefs, a cooperative program of the Winter Park Library and the Interfaith Council of Central Florida. Our topic today is going to be the Baha'i faith. Before we begin, just a couple of bits of housekeeping. One is I'm going to be distributing a brief questionnaire of 4 questions, just so you can reflect on the event today. And if you need a pen, I've got pens as well. The other thing is we have a couple of more sessions. We're going to be doing a session on the Seventh-day Adventist faith, which figures fairly prominently here in Central Florida with the health system. We are hoping to do a session on the Rastafari tradition and then on Unitarian Universalist tradition, and that will wrap us up through 2024. So thank you for your support of this important program where we learn facts and dispel misconceptions, and then probably learn about faith traditions and worldviews that we may not have known anything about before. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce to you Dr. Sheri Dressler, who just happens to be the co-chair of the Board of Directors of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida, but also a practicing Baha'i, who is going to be our presenter for today. So please welcome Dr. Dressler.
Hi, it's a pleasure to see you all today. I've been a Baha'i for about 55 years. I'm still learning, and there's no clergy in the Baha'i faith, so I'm a Baha'i who lives here in this area. I've been involved with activities in the Baha'i community here for a very long time, but I'm presenting what I understand are basic facts about the Baha'i faith. And after this, we'll have time for questions. So, how many of you have heard of the Baha'i faith before? Okay, good. Let me see this. All right. So, the word Baha'i means follower of the glory, follower of the light. It's from Persian, Farsi. And Baha'u'llah, who's the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith, that word means the glory of God, or the light of God. So, that's where it comes from. The Baha'i faith is an independent world religion. It's not a sect of Islam or a part of another faith. It's an independent religion. It's the most widespread after Christianity, with 7 million adherents in 232 countries. And it's the fastest growing religion. The believers are from all religious background, national, economic, racial, cultural background, representing 2,112 indigenous tribes, races, and ethnic groups, and that changes all the time. So that's what it was when I was looking this up. It could be different now. The point of it is that it's not limited to a particular place in the world or a particular religious background focus. I'm going to give you a short overview of the history of Baha'i faith, and the reason I am is because if you've been coming to this series, you hear often that there are questions of authenticity or a passage of who has the power to make decisions for a faith, and how confusing that can be. There's only one Baha'i faith all over the world, but this is not an accident because of the history of the faith. So I'm just going to share this very rapidly with you. You may have heard from other people, again, who've talked here, that at the end of the 1700s, in the beginning of the 1800s, there were a lot of people, both Christians and also Muslims, who were, from looking at their own traditions, thought that the promised one in their tradition was going to appear. And in 1844, in Iran, a man whose name was Ali Muhammad stated that he was a messenger of God, and that his job was to herald one who was going to come, who was going to fulfill all the prophecies of the past. And he took the name the Bab, which means the gate. And he he traveled among the people for 6 years. He was persecuted, but many, many, many thousands of people rapidly became followers of the Bab, which caused great consternation and difficulty with the government and the clerics of the time, and so they did everything they could to try to stop him. So at that point, one of the people who chose to be a follower of the Bab was a man whose name was Mirza Hussein Ali. And he was from a noble family, very respected family. Everyone hoped that he would follow in his father's footsteps. But instead, he had no interest in politics. He spent his time helping the poor, dealing with charitable works. And when he heard the message of the Bab, he immediately became a follower of the Bab. So this is 6 years that the Bab was there, and about 4 years in, the Bab was incarcerated. He was actually in other smaller prisons for short times, but this time they were really trying to keep him away from anyone. So he was imprisoned, and Mirza Hussein Ali took a leadership role, partially because many of the people who had been the strongest believers had already been killed. About 20,000 Babis were killed during this time. And so they had a conference. And at this conference, it became clear that the Baha'i faith was independent. It was not just a part of another religion. It had very specific ideas and concepts and parameters that were different than the other faiths. And at that time, this man took a leadership role. And after that, people called him Baha'u'llah. I'm pronouncing it the American way. If you do it Persian, I'll do it badly, but it's Baha'u'llah. But in any case, that means the glory of God, or the light of God. And he was so well respected that they gave him this title. So that was in 1848. And by the time it got to 1850, the government decided to execute the Bab. So he went from prison to another prison, and they put him out to be executed. Hundreds of rifles. There were some remarkable things that happened around his passing, but they did in fact execute him. And at that time there was some confusion among the Babis, but Baha'u'llah appeared to be one of the strongest leaders. So 2 years went by, there was all this confusion, and the government decided that people were still becoming Babis and they just didn't know what to do. So they came to arrest Baha'u'llah and put him in prison. So they put him in a kind of a cistern kind of a thing. It was very dark. There were other prisoners in there, and they would take one out every day to be executed. They put 200-pound chains on him, and he was there for a while. And while he was there, he had a vision that a maiden came to him and told him that he was the one that the Bab said would come. He did not share that with anyone at that time. So in 1853, he was taken out of that prison, but he and his family were exiled. And they were exiled actually throughout the Turkish Empire, but the first place they sent him was Baghdad. So they went to Baghdad, they were there for 10 years, and during that time, there were a number of people who were trying to take power, to claim to be an authority, but by 10 years, over the 10 years, it became clear that those people were misguided. However, there were more people becoming followers of the Bab, so the government decided it had to move Baha'u'llah again with his family, and just before they did that, there was a huge gathering. People from all over the city came to wish him farewell because they all learned to love him. And he shared with the close people around him that he was the messenger that the Bab, he was the messenger, where are we? There we are. That he was the messenger that the Bab talked about. And by then, they all expected that was true, so that was not really a surprise. So the family was sent to Turkey for 2 years, and they ended up in Accra, which was in Palestine, which is now Israel. And that is where the center of the Baha'i faith is. But he went as a political prisoner. So they were in barracks, he was under house arrest for years. His eldest son did all the work for the family, working with people in the community, but he was a prisoner. And at one point the governor came to him, because at first they thought they were murderers and whatever they could do to keep people away from them, but eventually they realized they were wonderful people. So he came to Baha'u'llah and said, "What can I do for you? I'll do anything." And he said, "I want you to fix the Roman aqueduct that's not working, bring fresh water to the city." So the city, which used to be pestilent, they used to think that when a bird flew over it would die, became green and verdant and very different than it had been before. 13 years before Baha'u'llah's passing, his son Abdul Baha asked him, "Please, please, I found a home outside the prison walls, please come and live there." And he said, "No, I'm a prisoner, I can't go." So Abdul Baha asked the governor to come and convince Baha'u'llah that he should leave. And in fact, he did. So 13 years before his passing, he moved into a large house outside of the prison walls, and the believers could finally come and visit with him. When Baha'u'llah passed away, he wrote a will. And in the will, he designated his son, his oldest son, as the center of the covenant, the person that all Baha'is in the world should follow. And he described specifically what his role would be, and that everyone should turn to him for guidance. Now, Abdul Baha was not a messenger of God. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But Abdul Baha was a man, but he had been living with his father by choice, I would say, because he believed that his father had the station that he claimed. So Abdul Baha took on this role, and from 1892, when Baha'u'llah passed, to 1921, Abdul Baha was still a prisoner until the Young Turks Revolution, when he was freed, and he suddenly was not a prisoner anymore. So at that time, he traveled to Africa, to the Middle East, to Europe, and to the United States in 1912. He did all of this traveling in about 3 years, telling people about the Baha'i faith and about the message that Baha'u'llah was sharing with the world. Baha'is see Abdul Baha as their example. There are pictures of Baha'u'llah in the Bab in the archives. No one uses those pictures. But people do have pictures of Abdul Baha as an example that we should follow. And there are stories and lots of things you can read about. When Abdul Baha passed away, he also wrote a will. And he stated very specifically that the guardian of the faith would be his grandson, who was an Oxford student at the time, to carry the faith forward. Now, it's important that I should say that in Baha'u'llah's will, he outlined not only Abdul Baha as the center of the covenant, but that there would be a guardian, and ultimately there would be a universal house of justice elected by the Baha'is of the world, who would have the authority that he was passing to them. So the guardian then was a young man, but he took this role, and he spent his time translating all of the Baha'i writings into English, which have now been translated into 800 other languages, and he also beautified all of the holy places, and he wrote plans for the growth and the education of the Baha'is of the world. And so the Baha'is have been following those plans all along since 1956, when he passed away. Now, when he passed away, they were in the middle of a 10-year plan, and the people who he had designated to help him decided that they should follow the end of the plan, and it was time now to elect the Universal House of Justice. There were enough Baha'is in the world. And they made themselves exempt. They said, we cannot be elected. And so in 1963, the first Universal House of Justice was elected. Since then, every 5 years, this election happens. All the national assemblies from all around the world come and they elect the Universal House of Justice, and they have the authority for the Baha'i world. Now, I'm going to explain some of this later, but Baha'u'llah also designed a structure for the Baha'i world, and it includes national assemblies where each nation elects 9 people as their authority, and then there are local assemblies in any community where there are 9 or more Baha'is to also have local assembly. Those are all elected every year. there's a video that I can show you, hopefully we'll have time, that you can understand more about how these elections work. But what I can say is, considering we're looking at elections right now, there's no nominations, there's no politicking, there's no campaigning, there's no money, there's no statements of what someone stands for. This is electing people that you know, and you know their character and their loyalty and their knowledge and their devotion and all of the qualities that you would want a group. All of these are groups of 9 people who would together make decisions and be the authority for the local community, the national community, and in this case, the Universal House of Justice. We can talk about that later, but I did say that Shoghi Effendi, as the guardian, beautified the holy places. Now, what I didn't say is, when the Bab was killed, the people who killed him threw his body in a ditch, hoping that it would not be dealt with appropriate ritual. But the believers stole the remains. They took the remains, and they hid it for 60 years. And after 60 years, Abdu'l-Baha managed to get the remains to Haifa, to Akka, to the area where the World Center is. And he built a mausoleum enough to bury the remains of the Bab. This is the structure that the Guardian built on top of that. And so this is the shrine of the Bab. This is the back. It's on Mount Carmel, and I'm going to show you this picture. You see, this is the top. Up here, this is the top. You're looking down, halfway down is the shrine of the Bab, and then it goes all the way down the hill, all the way down to the bottom. So this is Mount Carmel that you would see in some scriptures as part of the prophecies of things that would happen there. It's also important, you see this building over here, that's the archives, and it's part of a set of administrative buildings. I'll show you in a little while. This is, now Baha'u'llah is buried right next to that large home, and both of these places are places for pilgrimage. And it's all beautified with gardens. And when people come to elect the Universal House of Justice, they walk up these stairs to the shrine, right here. People from, I think, about 193 countries to elect the Universal House of Justice, and they're from all over the world. And sometimes it takes them weeks to get there, sometimes it takes them days to get there, but they all get there to do this. The World Center is, as I mentioned before, sorry, this thing rolls. You see the Shrine of Bab? That's the archives, and next to it are other buildings. And this building is the Universal House of Justice building, and this is where the Universal House of Justice meets every day. There's also, there are other buildings, study of the text, there will be a library. Now all of these buildings look like they're just a few stories high, but they're actually built into the mountain. So where it looks like it has 3 stories, it actually has 6 or 9 or whatever that, they're all built into the mountain. So, here's the question. What was the message that was so worthy of so much persecution? Every single time that the authority moved from the Bab to Baha'u'llah to Abdu'l-Baha to the Guardian to the Universal House of Justice, there were always a group of people who tried to take the authority for themselves. Every single time. And each time, by their own actions and their own choices, it evolved to nothing. So this has maintained the unity of the faith over 200 years. So now you have that question. What was it that was so worthy of such treacherous persecution? Not only then, but now. The Baha'is are persecuted severely in Iran, where they're the majority religion, the minority, religious minority, and this persecution is continuous. People are imprisoned, they're murdered, students can't go to school, their property is confiscated, their cemeteries are turned into parking lots. How terrible must that have been, right? So this message that would be one that would cause the government and the clerics to be so afraid. At the same time, what is the message that's attracting people all over the world? So let's talk a little bit about that. The overarching idea is unity, that there's one God. That one God is an unknowable essence, the creator of the universe, beyond our comprehension. If God is infinite, and we can't really understand infinity even like this. There's an infinite number of dots between my two fingers. We have trouble with that. So how much are we going to understand a being that can create the universe? And many of you have seen pictures from the latest telescope to see this gorgeous, beautiful universe, only as far as we can see it, of course. So the idea is that there's one God, the creator of the universe, and to assist us, because he loves us, he sends messengers every 500 or 1,000 years to help us understand our purpose, our reality, our spiritual reality, and what, as loved beings created by God, we should be doing, and to do this in a way that allows us to become the noble creatures that which God intended. So we get to the oneness of religion. He sends messengers, divine educators, physicians, to assist us to understand the truth as God would hope we would understand it. But he does this developmentally. And he doesn't do this because the message is developmental. He does this because we are growing and developing. So we have infancy, and we have childhood, and we have adolescence. And Baha'u'llah says we are moving from adolescence to adulthood. We're doing it with difficulty, but we are moving in that direction. And that the message of Baha'u'llah is a means to assist us to know what the medicine is that we should be taking that will help us to make this transition. Now, many of us maybe know adolescents who we wonder whether they will ever become adults. I'm a therapist, by the way. On the other hand, maybe we're functioning partially as adults and we still have some of that adolescence in us, and we notice that once in a while. But for the most part, if you ask an adolescent, what is it going to feel like to be an adult? They can't really tell you. But at some point, things happen, responsibilities occur, and someday, at one point you say, oh, this is what it feels like to be an adult. So then, adulthood is much longer than childhood. So we have a long way to go in this process. But what he says is that this is the time. And an example of this, an easy example would be fire. You know, if you have a small child, you just tell them that the fire is hot. You don't tell them that they can use it for something else. Just it's hot, stay away from it. Then when they get a little older, you say, well, actually, it's good for things. We can cook with it, you know. But you have to be really careful. Maybe you need to be supervised. And later on, you say, well, you know, there's even more to this. It's combustible and it has chemical qualities, and we can use that, what we know about fire, and actually do marvelous things with it. Now, the adult knows all these things beforehand. It's not that they don't know, but they're telling the child information that's true at the level at which they can not only understand it, but use it at that time. So in the same way, Baha'u'llah explained that these messengers understand because they are spiritually different. They don't necessarily know their role until it comes to them at some point in their life, but they take it, and they have a soul that is such that they can make the sacrifices that we know from the other religions, and they can provide this medicine that we need. And he said that the main message for us in this time is the oneness of humanity. This is a good time to think about that because, whoops, sorry, this thing keeps moving. What can I do? There we go. The oneness of humankind. So he says that mankind is one race. And he talks about unity and diversity. And he uses examples like flowers in a garden, leaves of one tree, drops of one ocean. But, you know, we don't ask a red rose to be yellow. We don't get concerned because one leaf looks a little different than another when it's on the same tree. We accept that it's on the same tree and that's okay. But our brain makes categories, and often we make them for reasons that we think we need at the time, but we make them incorrect. So this idea is that we must eliminate all forms of prejudice. Now, there are some obvious ones we hear about all the time. We hear about race, and we hear about nationality, and we hear about gender. But there's probably lots of other prejudices. Can you think of any other prejudices? Okay, we have gender, right? How about prejudice for small people and tall people? I get that one a lot. How about young and old? Educated and not educated the same way. Different forms of work, that some are somehow more better than others. We have lots of prejudices. And each one keeps us divided, keeps us making assumptions about other people, keeps us from getting to know people at the level of respect, and again, this idea of that every human being is created noble. That everyone has a soul, and that everyone has a soul that's worthy of respect, justice, education, health, well-being, opportunity to work in a spirit of service, and to be appreciated for their strengths. That we're all different. But the differences don't need to divide us. The differences actually are the things we can learn from, we can benefit from. And in fact, we don't have to be competing with other people for value. Everyone is valued. How would it be if every day you could know that every single person who talked to you was searching for your good qualities, wanting to support you in them, appreciating them, and not expecting you to be anything but be yourself? Just that would transform our experience. It would certainly transform our mental health, I can tell you. So somehow, what Baha'u'llah is providing for us is a blueprint, kind of a prescription, for how we get from the place we're falling to the place we can go that's really more consistent with our nature, our human nature. We have an animal nature and a human nature, and we need to strengthen that spirituality and that human nature, that higher level thinking that allows us to create and to think carefully about our decisions and what effects they will have on others in a broader way than anything else we know of on the planet. Just a little thing about men and women being equal. He says the success and prosperity of humanity is dependent on the achievement of gender equality, and it entails the equal education and opportunity of men and women. And he also says the world of humanity has two wings. One is women and the other men. Not until both wings are equally developed can the bird fly. Should one wing remain weak, flight is impossible. Now, for most of the women in the room, they already know this is true. But, nevertheless, this is a worldwide issue. Because there are places in the world where women have absolutely no place in the society at all. And yet, I know of places myself in Africa where there's an effort from the Baha'is to help the community, whether they're Baha'is or not, begin to understand the benefit that comes to a community when everyone contributes and is heard. Health gets better, the mortality rate goes down, everything gets better. Because they're all sharing from their own perspective and their own capabilities and their own strengths. He also says it's not for him to pride himself who loveth his own country, but rather for him who loveth the whole world. The earth is but one country, and mankind is citizen. It doesn't mean that we can't have nations, because there are local issues. But it means that if we don't recognize we're here on the same planet together, that we will continue to be unbalanced. We will continue in an effort for one side to try to maintain its own needs, will harm someone else. You've probably read places where there are islands that are underwater because other things were happening in other places in the world. They haven't caused it, but because we're connected, COVID is a really good example. You know, it's pretty hard to miss that germs don't really care about country lines. And they don't care whether you're male or female, or if you're Armenian or if you're Turkish, even though they fight with each other a lot. Somehow, this is a reality that's, it's time for us to decide. And it's really a decision. It's not just, oh, well, yeah, that sounds true. But it's a decision because we have all these spiritual qualities, but we need to use them. They're not just for us to acquire them. We need to learn how to use those qualities in action to transform ourselves, to transform our communities, our families, and ultimately the world. So this gets to our purpose for being alive. And he says our first purpose is to know and love God, to recognize the manifestations that all the religions are connected, to obey the laws because they're actually the prescription that our Creator is giving us to tell us what will make us happy and strengthen us and help us to grow. And to know our true selves. That's a process. There's no perfection here, it's all striving. But to learn, since we're all different, no one can actually learn for us who we are. We have to do that ourselves. And if we do that without fear that what we're going to uncover is a bad thing because we don't have the things that the people who are more valued have, it makes it much easier for us to become our true selves. As an example, our country doesn't value humility very much. But on the other hand, humility is a wonderful quality. It allows people to learn, to benefit from other people's intelligence and capabilities and to share them on. Okay, so there are all kinds of qualities. The Baha'i writings are filled with different kinds of qualities. And really, one of the explanations for the manifestations of God, it talks about we can't go to God directly, but these manifestations are like not being able to go to the sun directly, but we have the heat and the light, all of the characteristics of the sun. In the same way, these messengers are like perfect mirrors reflecting the qualities of God. And this is how we learn about those qualities, and we learn how to express them and use them in transforming ourselves and everyone else around us. So our job is to grow spiritually. Our job is not to just be comfortable all the time. That's the therapist hat again. But it's not just to be comfortable, it's to grow, to exercise our spiritual muscles, so that when we have difficulties, I'd say for myself, I measure my growth for how long it takes me to be mad that I'm having a problem to get to the point where I think, oh, I could learn something from this. So this is a change in how we perceive our purpose and these experiences that happen to us and what we should be doing with them. So I put down truthfulness here because Baha'u'llah says that truthfulness is the foundation of all human virtues. And without it, no other virtues can be acquired. Given that we're living at a time that people want to help, they want to convince us that truth is relative and that there is no truth, we might consider that truthfulness is absolutely essential. I know for relationships, truthfulness is essential for strong, lasting, growing relationships. In marriages, with children, with friends, with family, with communities, truthfulness is essential. And then we have to express these in action. And then there's an aspect of understanding this in terms of life and death. And I thought I would bring that up just a little bit because you've heard that from other religions. In the Baha'i frame of reference, there are different levels of existence. There is life after death. Not to come back here, but to move into other planes of existence. And that here we are exercising by developing these qualities, we're developing our spiritual capacities. And these are the capacities that we will have in the next life. Spiritual eyes, spiritual ears, spiritual limbs. And to the level that we have to develop them here, that helps us to be stronger there. However, it's not a static situation. All souls go, and all souls continue to grow through the grace of God, through the presence of God. He also says that we will recognize each other, and we will remember our experience here. Oops, I'm sorry, this keeps moving, I don't know why. Okay, and then in terms of action, the focus is on building an ever-advancing civilization. This is not necessarily totally new. Like in Judaism, you have because it's to repair the world. But this is not only just repairing the world. This is building an advancing civilization. This is moving forward with civilization and building it as we go. Have a culture of learning so that we're always learning and growing and using the medicine, using the guidance that God has been giving us a very long time to do it so that ultimately it leads to the well-being and the peace that has been promised in all the religions. He also says that science and religion are compatible. Now, we know that just in a few hundred years, the amount of information we have is huge compared to the amount of information we had in the past. All the more reason it needs to be balanced with spiritual understanding to use it wisely. In the distant past, if you could do it, if it was possible to do, then you could do it. Here, maybe it's possible to do something, but we shouldn't do it. But we have to have other ways of thinking about it to decide what our goal is for ourselves and for the world. So, and science without religion becomes materialism, and religion without science becomes superstition, and we need them both. He also says that world peace is inevitable. Now, there was a letter in 1983 that came out that was a promise of world peace. You can read it online. But one of the statements in there has always meant a lot to me, where he says that if we really believe that humanity will always be aggressive and that we're always sinful, then it creates a paralysis of will, and we don't try. And then we fulfill the prophecy we've created that that's going to always be the case. But we know the children grow up, and sometimes you look at them and you think, never going to happen. But they do. They have experiences and they find their way. And the religions, most of them promise that world peace will come. So he says that America actually can play an important role, but we have to choose to be a spiritual leader. And if we don't do that, those great blessings will be deferred, and this will come from other sources in the world. And that there will first be a lesser peace, which would be a political peace that the Baha'is would not necessarily contribute to except as individuals. But then there'll be a greater peace, which has been promised in all religions. There are spiritual practices, obligatory prayer, meditation every day, reading, learning. There's fasting, a pilgrimage if one can, and devotional activities. There are houses of worship all over the world. I have some pictures of them. And prayer is very central to personal well-being. And then there are social practices related to family. Service is emphasized because work in a spirit of service is considered worship. And in the process of taking those spiritual qualities and using them in service, we strengthen ourselves as well as strengthen our community. And education is essential. I mentioned at the beginning that there's no clergy. Most people say that how could you be organized? Well, clearly the Baha'i faith is organized. But not only that, it relies on the idea that every person must have the right to independent investigation of truth. That this is an age of education, everyone has the right to education, and everyone must be able to look for themselves for the truth, to see what they believe is the case. So that is the spirit of it. Therefore, there's no proselytizing. People share the message of Baha'u'llah, invite people to join us. There are many people who participate in Baha'i activities who are not Baha'i. The goal is to use these principles to transform ourselves, our families, our communities, and ultimately the world. There is a method called consultation. I have a video, but I'm not sure there'll be time for that. So I'm just going to explain what it is. There's a woman named, I think it was Amanda Ripley. She wrote a book on high conflict in 2021. And she did a section on Baha'i consultation as one of the best ways she'd ever seen to avoid conflict and personal attachment and self-interest in decision making. And I haven't read the whole book. Again, I have a video that it's only 4 minutes, but we'll see if we have time for it. But the basic idea is when you're all of the decision making in the Baha'i faith is done in groups, 9 people making a decision. And the rule is you offer your thought and immediately it's not yours anymore. It's owned by the group. You don't get a lot of crosstalk, so people are doing battles with one another. Again, people are not elected by representing someone who voted for them. It's all secret ballot, no nomination, so they're serving in these capacities. And consultation is a way of coming to the truth because people are learned detachment from their own ideas, so they're open to combining all the diverse ideas in the room to come up with a higher truth. Consultation is taught in the Baha'i community to children, older children, adults, everyone uses it. Even when you have problems, you get some friends together and you consult and use the same method. And it's very powerful. So, and you might want to look it up, and we'll see if we have a chance to do that. There are houses of worship all over the world. This one is in India. It looks like a lotus floating on the water. This one is in Chicago. It's the one that's for this country. It looks like lace, cement lace. They're all round. They all signify, have 9 doors signifying that all the religions can come together. And you probably won't be able to see this, but there are a number of other ones. This one up at the top is in Chile. This is in Samoa. That's in Frankfurt, Germany. There's a lot, from all over the world. And there are also some where there are large Baha'i communities. They're building them themselves. These have been built by Baha'is of the world. I should say, by the way, there's a Baha'i fund, but only Baha'is can give to the Baha'i fund, and there's never a request to individuals for money. It's stating what the need is, and people give as they choose, and the focus is on sacrifice. So giving $1 may be a greater sacrifice to one person than giving 1,000 for someone else. You choose for yourself. So, within the Baha'i community, there's a big focus on education, both for adults and for children. This is an example of a group in Africa. They're just sitting under a tree having a study session. This is the children's class. They have all different children for different parts of the children's class. They're saying prayers and then they'll split off into their different classes. But the basic idea is that Baha'is see this as a message for everyone, not just for the Baha'is. And I said this, there's no proselytizing, and many people just want to contribute to the effort to produce unity and well-being in their community and in the world. So, I don't know if you can read this. It says, "O people of God, do not busy yourselves in your own concerns. Let your thoughts be fixed upon that which will rehabilitate the fortunes of mankind and sanctify the hearts and souls of men. This can best be achieved through pure and holy deeds, through a virtuous life and goodly behavior. Let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self. So great is the light of unity that it can illuminate the whole earth." So that's the basic message of Baha'u'llah, for Baha'u'llah, for the Baha'i faith. There's lots of information online. You can look up. Why can't I get this to? Let's see if I can. Yeah. There's a website, but you can go online. There's an international website. This is the U.S. website, but there are many others. There are YouTube things on various topics. You can listen for yourself and hear some of the thoughts about different issues that are going on in the world, and also spiritual guidance about how to face them. The last thing I should mention, because I realize this doesn't have it, when I get a letter from the Universal House of Justice, it's the same letter that goes everywhere to every Baha'i in the world. And in April, they sent out a note letter, and one of the things that it said, which I found helpful, he said, you know, there are lots of systems in the world that are collapsing, and there's no reason to assume that as individuals we will not be affected by that. They said, but we do not have to be confused. We don't have to believe because things are collapsing, often because of the machinations of others, that we have no power to make choices for ourselves and the people in our community, the people in Iraq, and others all over the world who really believe that there's a better way that we can do this. We don't have to be confused by the news and the things that people want us to believe. A system that's not teaching children critical thinking skills very well. We can do this. And I invite you to read some of the things that Baha'u'llah offers, because I know it transformed my life, but it also gives me a path that I can look at that's positive and transforming and contributing to unity in the world. Thank you. Question, comment, concerns? I'm not sure I'm going to be able to hear you, by the way.
What is the significance of the number 9? That seems to refer to Baha'i.
The number nine is the largest whole number, and I don't know all of that. In this country, we don't tend to use numerics very much, but there are other countries where that is important. And there are also 9 main religions that we usually focus on. You know, there's Abraham, Moses, Buddha, Krishna, Zoroaster, Christ, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. So that's 9. Unfortunately, I have not done enough reading on what the other countries where those numbers, usually in Middle Eastern countries especially, there are a lot about the numerical number. The words are actually equal to a sum. And as I recall, the word Baha, when you do that, equals 9. But that's all I can tell you about it.
Okay, thank you.
Part of your message today was transformation. Can you give us an example from your own personal practice? How do you transform yourself?
Ah. Well, it's a good question. And I would also extend that to how it transforms people when they work together. For me, I grew up in a Jewish family. And I really didn't look at any other religions. But I recognized that there were things in that religion that I didn't necessarily believe to be true, because, I mean, an example would be I went to Hebrew school, and then they told me, but you're a girl, so it doesn't matter. I was only 7. But that struck me as not being consistent with some of the other things that I was looking for from religion. Now, of course, we've changed it. The Jewish community has changed that over time. And as so have so many others. But to me, I would say that that's because of the message of Baha'u'llah. I'm going to say something before I answer your exact question. Baha'u'llah says, when a messenger of God appears, the atoms dance. The equilibrium of the world has changed. And the possibility for that message to transform the world begins to take shape. So that even when people change what they're doing and they don't know why, they're responding to that different rhythm. And we look around the world today, and everything has been transformed. We have science, and we have a world that's contracting into a neighborhood. So for me, someone said to me at one point, they said, oh yeah, because I didn't think religion was going to solve the problems in the world. You know, people harming each other and prejudice, whatever. So I looked at politics for a short time and decided both sides looked the same. They were using the same methods. That didn't work for me. But somebody said to me, if you could look at all the religions and use explanations and understandings of what it says, that would cause you to see all of the religions basically saying the same thing, why would you continue to use the explanations that divide them? I didn't have an answer to that question. So that started me on a journey to look with my own mind. And up until then, I think I wasn't looking with my own mind. I was looking with the mind of the people who I respected, the people who had taught me, but I wasn't looking harder at those things. I also knew when I became a Baha'i that all of my friends would reject me and my parents would be hysterical. They were. It took my mother 8 years to accept it and my father 15 years to accept it. But on the other hand, it transformed my vision of what was happening in the world, and it gave me a chance to ask myself, who am I? You know, what can I do to make a difference? It caused me to travel all over the world. I've been to like, 60 countries. I've gotten to see what people can do when they work together. And I have lots of stories about wonderful people making a difference in their own community. 10-year-olds coming together from their junior youth group and transforming their whole community by finding out why the coral reef was dying, convincing their parents to change the way they were fishing, and they've been doing it for 200 years, and bringing the coral reef back. 10 years old. Nothing's going to convince them that they can't be change agents now. They already know that. So that's part of what the Baha'i community does, but it also did that for me. So when you say, how do you change yourself? I think, first of all, I really believe in prayer, but only if we act on it. Because if we, first of all, we pray and then, you know, it comes in layers, how sincere we are. You know, so we pray and then we pray, maybe pray again when it gets worse or whatever it is. But at some point, I think we get some kinds of answers. But if we don't use those answers right away, we don't get a chance to learn from it. We don't get a chance to reflect and say, what does this mean? What am I learning? See, it's always like, what spiritual quality am I missing here? You know, what can I learn from this experience based on my concept that I'm here to contribute love, unity, peace, patience, compassion, you know, justice. The list is huge of all these qualities I could be contributing, learning and contributing, and to learn how to do that. Wisdom is not something you're always looking, we're always aiming for it. But if you know that that's the goal, to be aiming, every day calling yourself to account and saying, what can I do that will make the people around me happier, better? And the result is when we serve like that, we're happier. And when we surround ourselves with people who are doing the same, then we're like courageous. You know, there's another thing that I learned traveling to 60 countries, but you know, people would say to me, you know, if I only had your courage, I would love to do that. And I said, did you think I wasn't afraid? I went anyway. I did it anyway, and doing it gave me courage. So I think that's what we have to do for the world. We have to be courageous. We have to look around, find the people who are willing, and not be confused about what other people want us to think that tell us that we should be fearful, you know, that we're so different we can never get along, that we don't have these capacities that can be transformed. Sure we do. Now religion has always told us that, but some of it's kind of covered up and it's got a lot that makes it harder to see. This is just renewing. You know, Christ said he was renewing the message of Moses. Well, Baha'u'llah is renewing the message of the past, but he's bringing it to this time. So I'd have to say that as far as growth, I'm still learning every day. You know, there's no end. But I'm definitely not the person I was when I started. The last faith that I learned about was Christianity. I learned about all the other ones, and then I went back and I said, okay, I'm ready to learn. Because I wasn't ready before. I had my own prejudices. You know, how can I tell someone else to overcome their prejudice when I'm not fighting my own? So it's an internal battle that ends up transforming everything.
Do we have time for one more question? Someone have one?
Yes.
Is there a designated time, is there a designated time or space where you gather with other fellow believers for worship and fellowship?
Yes.
All those beautiful buildings.
The Baha'is have a different calendar. 19 months with 19 days. 4 or 5 days left over. So once every 19 days, the Baha'i community comes together for kind of a spiritualized business meeting. But then there are lots of things that happen in people's homes or in Baha'i centers where people come together for prayers, people come together to study, people come together to socialize. So if you're interested in coming to participate in some way, then there should be, as far as I know, there's a local website, and you could go on there and they'll tell you what things are happening, and anyone is welcome.
Somebody want to sneak in one more question? We got like 2 minutes. All right. Thank you very much. Can we please thank Dr. Sheri Dressler for a wonderful and informative presentation. A couple of things. If you have the survey, please just, you can either drop it on where I was sitting or on the table in the back, along with the pen if you borrowed one, and we'll pick it up. I have a couple of things coming up that I wanted to mention. Our next session here is going to be on the Seventh-day Adventist tradition. That is going to be on October 14th, noon to 1 p.m. Also coming up later this month is the Global Peace Film Festival. That begins on, I believe on the 17th is opening night. 17th through the 22nd is the in-person. You can go to peacefilmfest.org and see the entire lineup, some really interesting films. The Interfaith Council of Central Florida is always involved in one way or another in Global Peace Film Festival. We also, let me see, there was something else I was going to mention. Go put in a plug for the Central Florida Pledge. You can go online, search for the Central Florida Pledge. This is something that has been put together locally as a response initially to the events in the Middle East beginning on October 7th of last year, but really is something that is meant to bring this community together and get people in all walks of life, community leaders, politicians, businesses, community groups, faith traditions, worldviews, to bring people together in Central Florida to commit to keeping this community together and harmonious, and to work to improve that as well. Stoketan, you had something you wanted to share with us real quickly?
Yes, thank you, David. Very briefly, this Sunday, I've got a presentation just like Sheri's, but it's about Stoicism, going back to 300 BC, the history of it, the ideas, And a lot of them are shared by Baha'i. So it's this Sunday at 2 o'clock at the University Club in Winter Park. 2 o'clock on Sunday, and it's a free event. It's sponsored by Central Florida Free Thought. Thank
Great.
you, David.
And just as a reminder, the mission of the Interfaith Council of Central Florida is to embrace irreconcilable differences and to cultivate shared values, revealing our best selves as individuals and as a community. Thank you very much for coming today, and we'll hopefully see you next month. Take care.